everyone, we are at the CBD expo in London.
So that's how it works. So you can't do that with advertising symptom ourselves. Because every single one of those products is very against placebo.
I know it.
Negative against placebo.
He's on my face.
You do 4 or 5 of those studies, they're all negative, the whole thing's rubbish.
No,
that's the other one.
That's the other one, yeah.
70-80% of the population. You just need a little bit of slightly more lateral thinking about how to look at the evidence base of cannabis. It's not beyond the wit of man to design studies that look sequentially at different products and take the totality of that response against placebo.
We're going the other way.
Notice of honestly called real-world evidence now. It's the evidence of people who use it.
Mike Barnes.
You can't deny, if I know exactly for a minute, 500 seizures or so a month to none at all, and say, well, we have to dismiss that evidence, that's just anecdote. Or I've had someone even this week say, well, that's a placebo response. It's a placebo, or it's a mad mother, as the mad mother says. You know, if you don't mind my phrase, bollocks, it's a placebo response. You don't go from 500 to nothing as a placebo response. But that's the sort of attitude we have. We need to take more evidence of different forms of medicine, observational trials, anecdotal, how much anecdote makes evidence. 1 anecdote, maybe you can dismiss. 10 anecdotes, well, I might begin to think of something. There's a company in Canada now that has 10 million data points. 10 million anecdotes. 10 million. I think 10 million anecdotes is worth thinking about. So my rant is now finished about the obsession of double-blind placebo-controlled studies. They do not work in cannabis medicine, full stop. I wasn't going to say all that. That's the problem with giving me an extra 15 minutes. I can zoom off at a tangent. What's the next reason? Guidelines. This is another rant. The government, I think it was trying to be helpful, or it may have done it deliberately, who knows, but it asked the Royal College of Physicians to produce guidelines on the use of pain and nausea and vomiting, actually, and the British Paediatric Neurology Association to produce guidelines on the use of paediatric epilepsy. Anyone here from the British Paediatric Neurology Association? Before I'm very rude to them. Anyone here from the Royal College of Physicians? I am. As I said before, I might not be for much longer, but they produced guidelines that I think are ridiculously restrictive, and they clearly haven't actually read the evidence. If you look at the RCP view on pain management, it says in the adverse effects associated with cannabis-based medicine, prescribed medicines, their place in the treatment of pain in palliative care is unclear and not recommended in routine clinical practice. There is no robust evidence for the use of cannabis in chronic pain, and their use is not recommended. That is so far from the truth. It's not even arguable. That is simply wrong. There is abundant evidence of use in pain. Is the rest of the 45 countries who are now prescribing for pain wrong? Is the whole of Canada wrong? No, it helps pain. It's not a wonder drug. It's not going to cure everything, but it helps about 70% of people with chronic pain. And of those, 25% could come off opioids altogether, and 25% reduce the dose of opioids, and that saves lives. It's all 25. It's easy to remember, because 25% less opioid deaths when you introduce medical cannabis. Which is, in this country, about 1,000 people will be alive if we'd introduced cannabis, as opposed to being dead from opioids. And on no other basis whatsoever I'd introduce cannabis, if it just saves opioid deaths. Nothing to do with the children with epilepsy, just the opioid deaths. So that evidence is, in my view, wrong, and doctors are hiding behind it at the moment. It's not mandatory, you can ignore it, but most doctors don't, because that's the only evidence and the guidelines that they've got. So they look at that, and as some have got past that, and then they've got to get approval from the hospital hierarchy, from the medical director usually, and is the medical director going to take a risk to go against the guidelines and the Royal College of Physicians? Probably not. In fact, they are not. The BPNA, bless them, are even worse. It should be a medicine of last resort. You could argue that maybe you should try some licensed medication, anticonvulsant drugs first. I'm not going to say cannabis should be immediately first choice for childhood epilepsy. But as a very last resort, I don't think so. I think it should be, you've got to try a whole range of things, but not every single thing there is in the British National Formulary. You've got to have an epilepsy that's proven intractable to treatment, with conventional licensed anti-epileptic drugs given at therapeutic doses, have not responded to a ketogenic diet, and are not candidates for epilepsy surgery. So the BPNA in their wisdom has said that you have to put a child through brain surgery, if appropriate, before using cannabis. And I personally think that is appalling, if not amoral. I'm warming to my theme here, aren't I? Okay. We recommend that patients who this is the worst bit, who are already taking cannabis-based products of GMP and GDP standard, that's good pharmaceutical products, good manufacturing practice, GMP standard, that contain high proportions of THC, are taken off those drugs and transitioned to CBD Epidiolex. So that's a very good medical principle. You find something that works and you say, we'll take you off what works and put you on something that might not work. It might work, but why do you want to change it? Recently, we've had suggestion that children come off things that are working, have a washout period for 6 weeks, and then go on to a placebo-controlled study. So something that's working, you take it away, and they might go on the placebo. That is immoral. That's not arguable. That is immoral. And we ought to go out and say that loudly. Some of us are. So the BPNA is immoral. And that's what you need to do with those guidelines. I like that slide. We have actually produced alternative guidelines for the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society. I think they're better. I put better there because I wrote them, so I can't say they're worse, can I? And I think they are. They're available on that website free of charge, and I think they're reasonable and I think they're balanced. They're not way over the top pro-cannabis. They are reasonable and balanced. And I think, Doctor, that we need to get that out there so people have at least an alternative guideline to compare against. We're going to do that. Number 4, why not? And this is a sort of half-reasonable why not. It's an unlicensed medicine, as I said before. And when you prescribe a licensed medicine, a doctor doesn't have to take personal responsibility unless they've made a complete cock-up of the dosage or something. You sue the company that made it. With an unlicensed medicine, you sue the doctor that prescribed it. So here's a higher level of risk for doctors who want to they have to take more personal responsibility for prescription. And understandably, I do understand that, a lot of people won't, because again, as it comes back to the first point, they don't know enough about it. If you don't know about it, and you might be sued personally if you get it wrong, that is quite a psychological barrier to overcome. I think that cannabis is remarkably safe. I think the evidence is there, and I have no problem at all about prescribing it on an unlicensed basis. But you've got to be reassured about that. You've got to understand that evidence before you can take that step, I think. And that's the amount of cannabis you must consume in 15 minutes to reach fatal levels, by the way. It's a little bit oversimplified, but it makes the point. I did some talk and somebody said, I'd like to try that experiment at the back. £1,500 of cannabis in 15 minutes. Someone said, it's the stacks of cannabis falling on you that are higher risk than actually smoking that amount. So that's another reason. It is a reason. And the government could help with that by making an unlicensed product for this circumstance not personally responsible for the doctor, in fact. And then number 5, we do have a lot of bureaucracy about this at the moment. As I say, a doctor needs to make that decision, and there are doctors around the country who have made the decision to prescribe, but then they have to go up to the hospital hierarchy, and the hierarchy has said, oh no, you can't do that. Our reputation is at risk. There's a big private hospital chain that we want to open a clinic within that chain, and they've said, oh no, we can't do that because our reputation will be at risk. We don't want to be associated with cannabis. It's really not the thing to be associated with. I won't name that company, as we're still in negotiation with them, and if I did name them, they wouldn't be in negotiation with them. But that's the sort of attitude we're getting at the moment. So there is a lot of bureaucracy. When you pass that barrier, also then money comes into it. And there's a couple of patients who got past the barrier. The doctor wanted to prescribe, the hospital said yes, but then it was stopped at the CCG. If those who don't know, that's the Clinical Commissioning Group. They're the people who have to pay for things. And they said, no, we can't afford it. Now, actually, if that happens, Matt Hancock himself has said that money will not be a barrier to this prescription. He said that publicly. So if anyone there knows that is a barrier, that the local hospital, CCG, won't pay for it, then that needs to be made public, because the NHS England and their comparatives in Scotland and Wales have said that cost will not be a barrier. They will pay for it. But that's another reason at the moment. And the other points that are worth mentioning, I might have spreading out my time. I'm doing all right, actually. I might have to speed up a bit now. There's the mess about CBD. It is a mess about CBD. I mentioned about whether you can prescribe it or not earlier. There's a lot of hemp-based CBD that is out there, some of which is very good, some of which is very not good. Huge variation in what's in it. And it needs a market that needs, I might be things thrown at me at the moment, but I think it needs a market that needs a bit more regulation and tightening up about what's in the bottle is what's on the label. And that doesn't happen, except with a few very good exceptions, all of which, of course, all those people out there do know what they're doing before somebody sues me. So there's a problem about CBD prescription, and then there's a big supply chain issue, but I don't think it's a big problem in the long term. But at the moment, if I write a prescription, that product has got to be imported. It's all imported. We need a homegrown industry. It's all imported at the moment. The importing pharmacy have got to make an application to the Home Office to register that company. They've then got to apply to the MHRA to approve the product. It's got to be the GMP standard. They've got to go back to the Home Office to get an import license, and when you've got an import license, the people in, say, Canada can get an export license and send it to the UK. That is a very bureaucratic, long-winded process that takes about 6 to 8 weeks, and that's for one named patient for 1 month's supply. So the logic for that is then you've got to write the second prescription before you've even got the first prescription, and you don't know what to write because the person hasn't tried it yet. So we have a lot of problems about supply chain, and we can't import bulk at the moment. We can import for 25 patients worth, but no supplier is doing that because there's not that number of prescriptions being written. You don't want to pay for 25 patients worth if they're not going to be used. So there is a major supply chain problem at the present time, but that will be overcome when there's more prescriptions written. So it still comes back to the lack of prescriptions. So what can we do in summary? Good. 1 is educate, 2 is educate, and 3 is educate. 4 is make the evidence more accessible, and the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society is doing just that, as is the Academy of Medical Cannabis, incidentally, as well. So if you want to know what evidence there is for Crohn's disease, you can click on the website in another couple of months when it's all done, and right, this is the evidence for cannabis being useful or not useful in Crohn's disease, or PTSD, or whatever. So we need to make that the evidence out there at the moment, more accessible to people. Because it's in a very diffuse literature, and obviously busy doctors don't have the time to research themselves what all the evidence say for Crohn's disease. We need better guidelines, which we've done something about, but we need better guidelines. We need to get rid of the restrictive guidelines. We need less restrictions on the doctors. And I think putting that together, we need something like most countries have set up a separate entity. Holland, for example, has the Office of Medical Cannabis, where they have a different view of evidence, they have a different way of controlling it and regulating it, and approving it, and conducting research into it. And I think cannabis is a different family of medicines. It's not a standard pharmaceutical product, and it needs a different way of looking at it and regulating it and supplying it. And doing that through an Office of Medicinal Cannabis, I think, is the way forward. And that can still be under the MHRA's umbrella, if you like. I don't care where you stick it, but you do need an Office of Medicinal Cannabis or similar. And we need to develop a UK industry. It's all importing at the moment. That's expensive. We need a UK industry to grow. That will produce employment. It will produce tax, and it will be quicker and cheaper supply. So what we really do need is the Home Office to be a little bit quicker approving THC cultivation licenses. I think there are very, very few out there at the moment, except for GW Pharma, which is the biggest exporter of cannabis in the world. And all of it goes abroad, which is a slightly bizarre situation. But anyway, we do need a UK-based industry, and that will help us enormously as well. So that's my summary list of what can be done to get more prescriptions out there. So that's the summary. That's just the sum of the strains. There's 2,368 others. So that's the complexity. I mean, at one level, cannabis is quite simple. Start with a CBD, start low, go slow is the thing. Build up through a CBD, build up through a balanced THC CBD product, eventually for a small number of people to a higher THC product. That's the simple level. Then you get more complicated and more subtle because you've got to think, well, which strain might be a little bit better? Do you want someone to help with their sleep in the evening? Do you want sativa strain? Do you want indica strain? Do you want myrcene as a terpene? It can get more complicated, but to start at the basic level is actually quite straightforward and shouldn't be something the doctors run away from. So I'm always a little hesitant about putting that sort of slide out. Oh my God, I'm never going to learn about 2,500 products. It's difficult for me to remember 6 antihypertensive products, let alone that lot, but it's actually relatively simple to start cannabis prescription. So what can we do? This was meant to lead into the panel discussion. So at the moment what we're trying to do is medicalise, pharmaceuticalise, if that's a word, cannabis. And I'm okay with that, as long as it's done properly with the criteria that I mentioned already. There was going to be on the panel others who are very pro grow your own. And that's, many nations around the world do allow those patients or people to grow a small number of plants themselves, 6 or so. I have the problem with that, but we have to remember that about 95%-ish of the population don't want to do it. Either they don't want to do it, or they can't do it because they're too disabled or pain, or they've got too many commitments to do it, like children with families. So it's certainly not right for everybody. But for those who it is right for, I haven't a problem about doing it personally. So that's a small answer, but not by any means a big answer. Other countries have not medicalised it. So does it need to be medicalised? That's a point for debate. I'm not going to say yes or no for that. But many countries now, you get expert dispensaries. In Canada, I think they're beautifully called bud tenders. That's right. And you get people who really do know what they're talking about, who you can go into there and get a very good advice on what strain to take and how to take it, and not through a doctor. Now that is genuinely for debate. Should we non-medicalise cannabis usage? I'm not saying anything about recreational use. I'm very careful publicly never to comment on recreational use, for the Mail on Sunday will be after me, which it has been already. So anyone here for the Mail on Sunday, hands up? Are you sure? I don't want to read about you on tomorrow's paper. I am not supporting recreational cannabis in this talk. I am potentially supporting the demedicalisation of cannabis for those reasons. And there's a difference. So they're my points for debate, and I think we're 2 minutes early. Shall we just move straight to the panel? But if there's people who want to ask a few questions beforehand, we've got a couple of minutes to do so. Sir?
Sorry, just to make an announcement quickly. Sorry to cut in.
Go for it.
The panel, I think, are in the room somewhere. If you make your way to the front, it's going to take 5 minutes to get you all mic'd up, so we can take questions while that's happening. So if you're on this panel, I think there's about 5 of you. If you could head towards that side, and then I will leave Mike to take questions from the audience.
Okay. Is there a microphone to come round, or you just have to shout?
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to be one coming, just shout, and I'll relay. Do we have a microphone for the questions? Oh, great, thank you.
Thank you for a very passionate and truthful presentation. I agree totally we need more education, especially for the medical profession around cannabis. What I personally disagree with is the need to change the law. What we need to be becoming aware of is the absolute criminal and fraudulent nature of a government which, as of 10th of December 2008, Her Majesty's government went bankrupt. They retrade now as HM Treasury, which are so fraudulent and criminal, and it's leading to all this insanity of people being denied medicine. So my point is, what do you feel about, rather than changing the law, we actually expose these criminals, these corporations who are made up of individual beings, and actually bring them to justice for the absolute horrendous crimes that they've committed over the last 100 years of cannabis prohibition?
Thank you for that. I'm not quite sure what to say to that, but you may feel that, but I couldn't possibly comment It's easier to change the law than to sue the government, but you've got a point. I take the point. Sir, whoever gets a microphone, shout.
Can I just ask, I'm Nigel Stokes from the Bioanalysis Centre, whether you're using therapeutic drug monitoring when you're looking after patients, and are there extra tools or assays that you need in order to perhaps reassure doctors that there aren't the build-up of toxins and other things which could lead to problems with the kidney, liver, etc. Do you need more tools analytically to help you adjust the dose and those things?
No. The drug interactions, I mean, theoretically cannabis, CBD and THC interact with some drugs. In practical terms, there's very few interactions. The two that, there's a long list of things that might be affected in terms of their level. The two that I think need to be aware of is warfarin. You need to be more aware of measuring the blood thinning for warfarin, and clobazam, children's epilepsy. It can increase clobazam levels, and they may need monitoring and the clobazam possibly reducing. There are some other theoretical interactions, like theophylline, for example, but generally it's a very safe drug. There's no evidence at the moment, there's no evidence that in the long-term usage it impairs kidney or liver function, so you don't need to test liver function. The only problem with liver function is the concomitant use of sodium valproate, epilin, and THC, and CBD. There's some children that liver enzymes have increased, but they've all, so far, I think I'm right in saying they've all been on sodium valproate. So if you've got a child with sodium valproate and you introduce cannabis, it's probably best to monitor liver function. But there's no other special tools that you need now. Somebody here, lady in blue.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello.
I work in the pharmaceutical industry, and clearly there's no regulation at the moment for CBD, if we consider CBD. How concerned are you about people driving the market and self-prescribing without correct information that's available in terms of what dosage they should have, labelling issues?
Yeah, that is an issue.
You know, claims that shouldn't be made.
Something's got to be done. Because I get literally daily, probably 2 or 3 times a day, I get people saying, I want to take CBD because they know it's so difficult to get a prescription for a proper product, and they know CBD has medical value because that's widely circulated in all magazines and everything. Yet they buy CBD from these guys out there, and you don't know what's in it, and they can't tell you how to use it because they can't advertise it as a medical use. So they can't say start at 10 milligrams a day and build up to 60.
Market's there because they can't get hold of the material through a medical prescription.
So we do need something that enable people are going to use this regardless. There's probably 100,000 plus people taking CBD for medical use out there, all of which without any advice from those who might know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
and that's got to change. And I hope that changes, but without it being forced down a medical pharmaceutical route, because it's being sold very nicely, it's remarkably safe. So I think we need to keep it on the shelves, but we need some way to make people aware of what it might be useful for, what it's not useful for, and what dose to use it in. And I advise people on that. Should I? I don't know, because but no one else is doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do now is bring the panel on stage. So much of the themes we've been discussing with Professor Barnes will be